And today a podcast on podcasting here at the Real Estate Crowdfunding Show, syndication in the digital age at gowercrowd.com with the managing principal of ASYM Capital and host of the Cashflow Connections podcast, Hunter Thompson. Now, I started podcasting so long ago, I can't even remember when I started. I do remember, however, spending an inordinately long time preparing, scripting, figuring out how to syndicate, building a website, figuring out how to record, edit recording, remove ums and ahs, equalizing the sound, etc., etc. It was a monumental task that took me a lot of diligent study to master. Now I don't even think twice about it. And we even build best of class podcasts for clients so they can completely avoid any of the brain damage putting these things together. Importantly though, I was recently contacted on LinkedIn by somebody asking if I monetize the podcast. And it occurred to me for the first time that actually I do. Because podcasting is probably the single biggest driver of traffic to my website, and also for driving new clients to Gower Crowd, and actually in providing extra value to existing clients. In fact, I strongly recommend anyone to get started with podcasting if you want to build your business. And so when Hunter Thompson, my guest today, and I were discussing what to discuss, why the idea of talking about the benefits of podcasting was an obvious and timely choice. Now, podcasting is really content production by any other name. There are multiple ways a podcast can be repurposed, and your ability to create content is what will drive investor traffic online to your deals. So to find out how this fits into a complete real estate equity financing system, sign up for the whiteboard workshop at the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com, where I will walk you through the investor acquisition system that we build for clients and where you can learn exactly how to build one yourself so you can raise potentially all the money you will ever need for your project. So you can sign up for that there at gowercrowd.com on the podcast page. All right, enough of that. Onward and upward to today's guest, Hunter Thompson, real estate syndicator, managing principal of ASYM Capital and podcast himself, as we talk about the benefits and value to your business of having your very own podcast. Hunter, thank you so very much for being on my podcast. And we are rolling straight from your podcast. So, right back to back, I'm dying to know. Let's talk about podcasting, right? We'll talk about your background and your expertise in real estate and everything, etc. later. But
Sure.
Tell me, why did you start podcasting? Tell me all about that.
To be honest with you, I'm probably asking myself, when you ask me that, the first thing that comes to mind is, why did I not start sooner? It's just the best medium, and it's clearly for my personality. It was such a good fit. And as soon as I did my first episode, that was the first thing I thought is, why didn't I start earlier? So, to be honest with you, when I got into the real estate sector, the main thing was networking events. And so people would throw them weekly, monthly, depending on what it is. I used to go to 3 to 5 every single week, living in Los Angeles, driving around, going to traffic and paying $10 to $25 every single event. The challenge is not really even the time or the dedication it took to do that, but the fact that the attendees were not of the caliber that I felt I was constantly learning from. And that's no disrespect. It's just that everyone that does a lot of networking events knows you hit a ceiling at a certain point. And I felt like there was an opportunity to bring a higher level of sophistication in a much more efficient manner and a more scalable strategy as well. And so I started in 2016. And it's really as simple as during those years of building up my network, and I have a long background of investing as well, I had created an incredibly compelling and interesting group of friends. And I basically contacted my friends that I had been doing business with and said, let me record these conversations. And the first conversation we ever recorded was one of our best episodes. And so that's when I was like, man, why didn't I do this earlier? I was sitting here for years. So that's when I got started. That's why as well.
All right. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. What were the biggest challenges that you found just kind of getting the engine going to start your podcast?
Well, most people's first podcast episode is going to be their worst. And so I think a lot of people fear that, right? They're worried that this is going to be online, which means it's in ink, which means it's forever, and it can be easily shared. Okay. So when I announce I'm going to have a podcast, and this is something that maybe a lot of people are thinking right now that haven't done this. They're thinking, okay, on a risk adjusted basis, it's favorable, as in it doesn't cost more than $200 to get started. But that doesn't factor the emotional component in, which is a big reason a lot of people struggle in business. You know, if you're not prepared for the embarrassment of fumbling in your words, if you're not prepared for the embarrassment of forgetting to record a really important conversation with someone you have a lot of respect for, those are the types of things that can really limit people's success. And so that was a concern of mine, just like everyone else. But again, the first episode will likely be your worst. So give yourself permission to make those mistakes. And there's many, many things I can add along the way, but that was a big hurdle, was just that emotional component of saying, hey, to the world, I think that what I have to say is worthwhile. That is a big hurdle for a lot of people, myself included.
Okay, so it's funny that you should say that, because I have never listened to my first podcast and I have no desire to actually go back and listen to it again. All right, so let's chat about how do you bring, what is the purpose of a podcast? So you've described it, an interesting, I'd like to connect the dots between going to a conference, which is what most people do think about. I mean, my clients tell me, we just flew to this, like, why are you doing that even now? Right, so why do you go, what is the connection between going to a conference and having a podcast? What are the similarities? What are the overlap, and what are the benefits, pros and cons of having a podcast over that?
Sure. So I think there's an important distinction to be made between typical weekly, monthly networking events and conferences and podcasts. I think they all play a role, but my real challenge was that I was struggling to go above a certain hurdle at just typical networking events. So again, with a purchase price of, let's say, $25, it attracts a lot of people that are not interested in participating in the real estate business in the way that I was interested in participating. I know that you are a huge proponent of the syndicated model. Almost all of my entire portfolio is invested in passive syndications. When you invest in syndications, or if you create syndications, you stand to gain high returns as a passive investor. And if you create them, you stand to gain millions and millions of dollars. So when you're able to generate millions and millions of dollars, you don't find yourself with the time to go to a lot of in-person events. And so for myself, someone that's positioned their portfolio like that, I'm not meeting a lot of people that I'm going to be working with or investing with or raising capital from. Now, the conferences, let's say most people maybe attend, let's say somewhere between 2 and 4 a year. These are typically in the $500 to $1,500 to maybe even $3,000 range. That can attract a lot of caliber of talent, but the challenge there is the expense itself, right? So you're playing this game where if you're going to fly to Orlando for 4 days, spend 3 nights in a nice hotel, and pay for the ticket price, you're talking about $3,000, $5,000 on a business expense. And you're hoping that you're going to get the best out of it. So there's an amazing way to supplement that, especially as it relates to education. But the component that I think most people give up is that podcast can be excellent for networking as well. I'll give you a perfect example. This conversation. Adam and I have known about each other for several years. We haven't gotten to connect, but now I'm positive if we continue this conversation, we'll eventually find a deal that we can work on together. Or even better, we'll find a way to solve a problem for someone else because we'll know about each other and know what our interests are. That's a great way to do it. Another way to do it is to reach out to guests that speak your language, that you feel from a gut intuitive perspective that you should reach out to them and start that conversation. So I mean, that's just some of the examples. I think the networking event, the conference, and the podcast medium all are incredible. And just one more pitch about the podcast medium.
Sure.
From an influencer's perspective, it's the most intimate source of communication. You're literally plugged into someone's ears. You can listen at a speed that's advantageous for you. You can listen while you're going and coming to work. And I know you have a PhD. I'm confident that someone can get an MBA in real estate, or at least the equivalent, driving to their job. That is an unbelievable thing. And I'm very, very grateful to be part of it and to be able to participate in people's learning, as I know you are as well.
Gosh, Hunter, yes, fascinating insights. And, like I say, I type things out. So you might hear me typing there. I've got lots of things I wanted to follow up with you on that. So let's actually drill back. It suddenly occurred to me that you're a sponsor who raises money for your deals. And you are one of the few who has a podcast. So let me ask you this. So you are communicating primarily, your audience is primarily investors, you're the relative investors. So how do you do that in terms of, what's your thought process every week as you think about what am I going to have on the show? How am I going to create value? What's your process? How do you decide what that's going to be?
So it's interesting because people start shows for different reasons. The way that the content is created and curated is 100% based on my curiosity. And so that's one of the reasons that our show is a little bit different. And that's why most people's shows are different, but there's that I out the show for free, maybe even loss. Better, I'm getting the guests that I actually want to talk to on the program. So we talk about things that maybe the general masses aren't interested in, but a few people are intimately interested in, because you can only go to our show to get that particular content. I'll give you a couple of examples. So it's a real estate podcast. I should mention the name probably. I'm not a good podcast host.
Please go for it. It'll be in my show notes as well. Don't worry. Right. Please say it. What is it?
So it's the Cash Flow Connections Real Estate Podcast, and cash flow is 2 words there. We've had people like Grant Cardone and Orrin Claff, but we've also had people that aren't as recognizable, but I'm just fascinated by, like IMF consultants or other economists that I've followed their work for years. And the platform and our listeners have given me an opportunity to reach out to those people directly and have them on their show. So it's a wide variety of what I deem to be interesting. Everything from optimizing your morning routine to calculating the debt service coverage ratio of a development.
Yeah, and that word curiosity is just perfect. We were chatting a little earlier and you asked about my podcast. And this year I've kind of been struggling really to figure out, all right, where am I going to take it? But I think you nailed it. It's about curiosity. And because look, we all evolve in our careers and what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and we're all facing challenges. So why not find a solution to a challenge by inviting a world expert onto the show, ask them whatever it is you want to ask, and share that wisdom with an audience. I love that. So curiosity, I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more natural and right in my own show this year.
Totally. And you have to be, or it's not worth it.
Now, what about the impact of your podcast on your ability to raise capital? Tell me what you've seen in the last 3-4 years and how that dynamic has changed.
Well, from a big picture perspective, I think that there's a massive myth in the industry of real estate that if you have a good deal, the money's going to show up. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you have a good deal and no one knows who you are, the good deal is not that consequential. The key is attracting the right investors. And again, the other myth, and I think a lot of people think about raising money, which is a big part of what I do. They contemplate it in such a way, they think about, they've got their mother, they've got their rich uncle, they've got their doctor, and they're going to go out and try to convert these people to real estate investors and get them to send us $25,000. Now, some of those people, like your mom, for example, may love you and may send you that $25,000. But what they're not going to do is consistently fund your deals over and over and over on a quarterly and annual basis. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you create something that's scalable and replicatable? And I have found, and this is what I wrote my book about, is it's not about going around chasing those leads around, trying to have them have a pseudo-religious experience. I've been investing in the stock market all my life, and now I'm going to take this 50 grand and invest it in every single one of Hunter's deals. It's about creating educational content that attracts people who are already interested in this particular topic, and to a certain extent indoctrinates them through the funnel and allows the business to be much more scalable, because you're creating this content that can be used, repurposed, and then sent to different investors at different times. And it makes the whole business actually economically viable. So to put some numbers on that, because that was a little bit wordy, my first capital raise was an abject failure. You know, I'm sitting here speaking to you. I am fine. I believe myself to be a confident communicator. I believe myself to be a very knowledgeable real estate investor. And I certainly was the first time I tried to raise capital, but it failed miserably. I couldn't raise $1 in a room with 30 people, each of whom controlled $1 million each or more. And now, we get an email where someone wants to invest $500,000 with me that I've never spoken to before.
Yeah.
Why? Because of consistently putting out content that has really had them buy in at a high level.
That's really fascinating, isn't it? In fact, I just was typing out my next question, and that was direct. You answered it almost there, but what kinds of first contact, or how has your first contact with prospects changed since you've been podcasting? Yeah.
Man, that's a great question, because it's two-sided, right? So their first contact with me is different than my first contact with them. So by the time that we get on a phone call, there is a quasi-celebrity status typically that I've acquired through years of work. And some people may hear that and think that sounds a little bit silly. They don't know you. The reality is many of our investors know me far better than some of my best friends when it comes to particular topics, because they've heard me correspond on that wide variety of topics that I mentioned earlier. So the first conversation is not really about, let me prove to you that I'm worth your time. It's more about, I'd love to learn about them so they can kind of show me why they are a good investor that they should fit into our company. That reversing the entire flow of funds from me chasing them down to us now being chased down is what the book Pitch Anything is about, which is quoted a couple of times in my book as well. And it makes, like I said, it's much more economically viable because I'm not scheduling call after call, trying to cram my head against a wall. They want to schedule calls with me and are grateful that we're able to take the time to do that.
Isn't that incredible? That's been exactly my experience. As you can tell, I'm super ancient. So I'm an old dog that learns some new tricks here. And over the last few years, my experience has been that I will get people contacting me quite literally on a phone call saying, gosh, I feel like I know you. It's like who is that? I've never had any contact. Like, it came out of absolutely nowhere. And my clients actually tell me, and this is your experience, right? Because you're a sponsor as well, but the way they articulate it is that their first contact, the prospect is significantly further along the sales process than before they started building a digital presence, right? They're closer to, where do I sign and wire, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it, like I mentioned, you can really run circles. So like we have about 315 investors or so. So if I had to convince each of them that I operate a firm that they should make a bet on, it would be almost impossible for me to do so. I mean, 30 minutes times 300. I mean, let's just say it was a 30-minute conversation alone. That would be that'd be my whole year. So this just really helps that whole process.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, so so actually, let me ask you this, and then I've got a question about how it fits into your overall marketing, how podcasting works for that. But how do you use the content? So I can share with you what I do, but I'm interested.
Sure.
We just recorded a podcast, your podcast. So how do you actually now use that digital recording that we put together, that audio recording?
So, I mean, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to be downloaded to Lisbon, which is our syndicated real estate hosting platform, and that will send it across multiple different platforms. So that's going to go to SoundCloud, it's going to go to Stitcher, it's going to go to iTunes, and a variety of other ones such as Google Play, etc. The main one, at least for our purposes, is iTunes, because most of our listeners are going to be listening on an iPhone, and they're going to be using the podcast app. Now, we also have had success taking a 15-minute clip of that podcast and posting a video to Instagram or Facebook to generate some attention for that particular episode. And that's really the extent of how we use that. Another way we can reuse things, typically if it's a really amazing episode, we can convert that to text via a company called rev.com, rev.com, I believe, for about $1 a minute of audio. And we can create an ebook from that. So if we did a really specific conversation, let's say just about podcasting, and a lot of our listeners were interested in that topic, we could convert this very conversation for probably about $500. And there, you've written your first ebook and you didn't have to become a good writer.
Okay, you're giving away all the secrets now. Perfect. So I'm going to share something with you. First of all, So you don't have any, or I mean, I can ask anyway. You have an affiliate relationship with Rev?
I don't. Thanks for asking. No,
I
I
figured
don't.
you probably
I should
didn't.
mention that. No, yeah.
No, figured you probably didn't.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just tell you, there's another one that I use. This is top secret, so don't tell anybody.
Got it.
This is one of my secret weapons, Sonics, Sonix, $8 an hour, AI transcription. Amazing. I use it all the time.
Great. I'm going to write it down.
So I was telling you, I was also writing a book, and the reason it's such a challenge is because the whole damn thing, excuse my language, is basically transcripts that I'm editing. So
that is a beast. That is another beast.
It is.
Audio text into something that you're going to write, especially if it's something that you're super proud of.
Yeah.
A skill of in itself.
It's a lot of work. It's harder than you imagine. Yes. So I'm actually intrigued. So you talked about, so that's repurpose. Actually, the question was really about repurposing. So you take an audio file and you convert that into text using transcription AI or however you do it, right? So now you've got an article, brilliant. And now you can post that online. This is what we do all the time as well. That becomes a blog post that now gets circulated on social media. You also talked about video clip. Now, we're on video, you and I. If you want to watch this podcast, you can find it there at GowerCrowd.com and on YouTube. But you and I just recorded audio for your podcast. So tell me how you go from audio to video.
Yeah. And this is something that I think that we've been kind of battling between the audio video versus just the video, versus just the audio, I should say. The way that we do it is we have our background with our branding and a pulsing icon of ours so that people can see that it's a video, and the audio plays, and there's also a visual representation of the sound so that people know they should turn the sound on. And that's one way to do it. There's many companies that do that. I can't think of one right now, but one that does it is, I think, repurpose.io, which can convert your podcast to automatically upload them to YouTube with that visual representation of the audio as well. I think that's $10 a month.
Oh, that's kind of cool. And then do you put a captions on it? What's it, subtitles as well?
I haven't done that. We do the quote that we're doing in Instagram. We'll do the quote that we're referring to. So it's not actually playing. It's just a photo of the quote. And there's a couple of companies that do what you're suggesting, but I don't use any of them.
And as a component of your digital presence, as a sponsor, describe to me the full landscape of how you communicate with, how you draw in prospects and how you start establishing a relationship with them. Describe that to me and how podcasting fits into that.
Yeah. So this is what it's all about. And this is what the marketing component is all about. So a lot of what I spend my time on either doesn't make money or loses money. A lot. And then I have a very lucrative real estate business. And we also have a coaching program as well for real estate entrepreneurs that does make money as well. And that's how the cash register rings. So here is what the entire funnel and business looks like. So we have a podcast, which is free. We have a book, which is Raising Capital for Real Estate. This is $8. I usually lose about $1 every time someone buys one. So get out and buy a bunch. I also have a conference, which is in LA. And it's very challenging to make the economics work because the reason that most conferences are in Las Vegas is because there's a lot of hotels and it's relatively inexpensive. California, particularly LA, very expensive. But I like to do the conference here because I live here and it's convenient for me. So we make money or break even somewhere in that range on the conference. But all this works to create this massive infrastructure to educate and, to a certain extent, like I mentioned, indoctrinate leads so that the entire closing process is much more easy. So the audio is going to touch someone from an audio component. The book is going to be physically in their home. The people learn different ways. So you have to be cautious of that. Sometimes we conduct in-person meetings and, of course, in-person dinners with investors and such. And so you are constantly hitting someone on a weekly with the podcast, bi-weekly in our case, monthly with newsletters, quarterly with our quarterly reports, annually with our conference, and then they have the book to supplement all of them. You're just constantly hitting them with different senses and different time intermediaries or time intervals. And it creates a massive infrastructure that's just highly scalable. and lucrative way to raise capital.
All right, I have to ask you a question, Hunter, because you said this at least twice already, that you don't make money from your podcast. So I'm going to ask you a question. How many investors have invested in your deals with whom you have established a relationship via your podcast?
Almost all of them.
Right.
Almost all of them.
Yeah. So they've not bought your podcast. They're not paid for it, but you've raised millions of dollars because of it.
Exactly. Tens of millions of dollars exactly because of that. And more importantly, it's not just that it's attracted them and they say, I saw you on a podcast. We can talk also about how to get on other people's podcasts in a moment. But the key is that it's the level of buy-in. I think a lot of people are contemplating building their own brand and they want to just be like everyone else. And part of this is from a tribal perspective, from an evolutionary perspective. I think we're wired to want to be liked by everyone. There's a good reason from that. But the reality is that is not at all how this works economically. I don't want to have a little bit of buy-in from everyone. I want to have a 100% buy-in from just a few hundred people. And those few hundred people, especially accredited investors, can drastically change the financial outlook of your entire life.
Fascinating. Excuse me. You are the perfect poster child for sponsors getting online.
That's right. I mean, it's a good example of that. And I'll add to that. I have, like most people, interesting things about me, some of which are radically unpopular. I have some ideas politically, philosophically, religiously, whatever, you name it, school, etc., that are just wildly uncommon. And so going into the podcast world, I was scared about what I was going to say because I was going to turn my listeners off. And slowly I've found the more that I am myself, the more that I'm attractive to the right people that are going to go all in on my worldview. And that is what really matters. That's what really is compelling about this medium in particular.
That is a profound insight. The absolute key to success online is authenticity. This is something that we spend enormous amounts of time on with new clients early on. They want to paint, their intuition is to paint a picture that they think investors want to see, right? Kind of this idealized version of the perfect sponsor, right? Somehow they want to create that, but you don't win that way. You have to be authentic to yourself, and inevitably there will be those FUs out there, right? The people cannot stand the sight of you, but for every one of us, that's what I like to say, the bell curve. You remember the bell curve? We used to call it the normal curve, right? On your standard deviations on both sides. Those that think you suck, for every one of those, there's somebody who loves absolutely everything that you say. So whenever I get those emails, Hunter, I think, oh, good. That means there's somebody out there loving what I'm doing. All right, let's just give him a reason to give me a call.
100%. Absolutely.
All right. So you said we'll get to it in a minute. So I'm going to pick you up on that. How to get on other people's podcasts, and why does that matter? Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the real question is, how can I leverage what someone else has built to attract people into my infrastructure, right? I mentioned all this work we're doing for free. Well, it's not really helpful unless people are in the infrastructure. So prior to doing this, though, it's really important that you have a lead capture magnet. So before going on any podcast, going on a podcast without a magnet at the end of the day, a call to action is not going to generate results. So it's important to have, what most people refer to as, an ebook, for example, some kind of free report that you can get in exchange for an email address. And that's an entire different conversation, but typically, somewhere between 6,000, 10,000 words, something that you believe can speak to your investor base that will last a long time. Now, once you have that, you've already done all the hard work. Now the question is, can I get in front of new people, talk about the content that you're an expert in because you just wrote this book? And I talk about it in my book, how to do it really, I'll give an example. I will have a VA create a Google form and I'll have something like this: the name of the podcast, the name of the host, the email of the host, a rating on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how like my book or how relative my information will be to them, and then the number of Twitter followers, maybe the number of comments in iTunes. And I'll search by one of those metrics: number of Twitter followers, number of comments in iTunes, which, by the way, make sure to rate this show that you're listening to right now. Adam has given away so much great content. Rate the show because it gives you the ability to attract great guests. This is the whole process that virtually everyone in the space is doing something like this. Then I have my VA start reaching out to them with a one-page highlight reel of my speaking credentials. What have I done? I've raised several tens of millions of dollars. I've written a book about the topic. I'm the host of this podcast and other things. And that's compelling. Now, if you're just getting started, I actually suggest you do something that's counterintuitive. Sort again by number of reviews, but sort by least and start at the bottom. So by the time you get to guys like Adam, you've been on 3 or 4 podcasts. You've been on a lot.
I'd be the first one on your list.
Exactly.
That's why I'm the last on yours.
No.
After 4 years, here he is.
No,
Where's
exactly.
Gower?
No,
there he is. Is anyone else? No, get him on the phone.
Nothing could be further from the truth. But you get what I'm saying. Once you get that momentum, Adam mentioned that he doesn't want to go back and listen to his first interview. Well, same will be true for you. So don't jump all the others and reach out to Adam because you don't want to blow it in a big way on a big stage. Get some momentum so that when you send it out to the bigger shows, you can show them that you're competent and been able to speak. That right there is a $2,000 idea. That is the playbook for making money in this space right now.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, I've just been thinking about, in fact, probably triggered by your call to me to come on your show. Very, very flattering that you asked me. Thank you so much.
Of course.
It starts me thinking about, well, gosh, I've been producing my own podcast for so long. Maybe I should get on some others. I mean, I've been on a few, but just not, I've not been collecting them. Let's put it that way. So I've been thinking about doing that. All right. So let's see how much time have we, it seems like we've been speaking. Yeah, look at that. Time flies with you, Hunter, every time. All right, so let's spend a couple more minutes now talking from a sponsor's perspective. How much time do you spend actually with podcasting and with marketing relative to how much time you used to spend or would have spent meeting and greeting? What we used to call the dog and pony show, right? When you're trying to raise money.
Yeah. So, I mean, the time is, so it basically replaced it, because at the beginning, my day, so just to clarify for people that aren't as familiar. So the way that my company is positioned, we joint venture with people who focus exclusively on the operating side of the business. And we act as an investor relations sort of arm. So the way this works is that a great example of a good operating partner for us is someone who's got at least $100 million under management, someone who's been doing it for years, but who doesn't like directly interfacing with investors. That's what I love doing. Okay. And we have a platform that's established to facilitate that. So we form a joint venture agreement and a joint venture company and conduct business where we're bringing capital, we're issuing distributions, we're interfacing with investors, and the operating partner can focus on things like how much rent should be raised and when rent should be raised. So back in the day, starting in 2010 or so, I was just constantly, all I wanted to do was to fill up my calendar by talking to people I didn't know about real estate. And I remember, people would ask me, what I did. And there was a moment where my calendar would just be empty. And any entrepreneur probably knows that feeling where you have to fake it even to yourself. You have to fill up your calendar by start doing things that aren't really super efficient, but there's no way to outsource it because you don't really need to outsource it. That was me, like most entrepreneurs. And slowly I started to gain some notoriety. Slowly I started to be the type of person that can conduct his own networking event. And that generated interest. But I just was so drawn to the online space. So it basically replaced it 100%. And now to facilitate that in-person relationship, which is so critical for most people, me less so, to be honest, is the annual conference we host. And that's a great opportunity for me to meet all of our investors, for them to meet our operating partners that they've invested with. And like I mentioned, those dinners act as a great supplement. But the direct answer is almost 100% has been dedicated to the online space.
Fascinating. And so, okay, good. I'm glad that you described what you do a little bit. Normally I ask people right up front, but I'm glad that we got to it right now.
Sure.
So you invest in third-party operators.
Correct.
So the narrative that you have to articulate to your investors presumably is not just that this is a good sponsor, but also that you know what you're doing to figure out that they are a good sponsor. So how do you do that? Again, we're talking about the digital space. How do you educate people in both of those components?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest with you, this is something everyone acts in this space in a different capacity. And we aren't a crowdfunding portal. The portal is not, we have a portal, but it's just that we use technology as a way to have more accurate information. But we're a private equity company that's enabled by technology. So to clarify, the relationships that we have with sponsors are not curated through online means. These are relationships that we've developed over years through investing and you know, decades of friendship and things like that. So that part of the business is not very scalable. Because of that, we don't do very many deals. Now, in terms of showing that we're experts, the podcast is a great mechanism for that. I particularly like the long form interviews. You know, if you want to listen to a particular podcast, Google my name and then workforce housing. You'll find an interview we did with one of our operating partners where it's just like, you can tell from the level of conversation that both he and I understand the space at a high level. And that provides a level of confidence that both he and I have this pre-existing relationship. We've had success investing with each other before. And that also I understand the nuances of workforce housing well enough to be dangerous. But when it comes to deferring to them, when it comes to implementing the business plan, I would gladly defer to them because that's what they've been focusing on while I've been focusing on conducting interviews, for example.
Okay. And then just one last question, just to drill down on that a little bit more. What I'm interested in is what is the mechanism or what is the process by which you teach people in your investor network that you have these skills? So the podcast you said is one way, but is there other stuff that you find specific to an operator is helpful?
That is by far, the podcast is by far the most meaningful because especially since we focus on those 45-minute to 1 hour conversations, it is, in my opinion, impossible to BS your way through a detailed conversation about underwriting a 200-unit multifamily property if you don't know what you're talking about. Now, for a 15-minute conversation, you can hold it down. What's the cap rate? How much are you going to raise rents? Right. What I'm talking about, you know, ROC, DSCR, just going through just a variety of vocabulary words, there's really no stone left unturned.
Fascinating. Okay, so these are like highly detailed webinars in a way that you're putting together in a podcast for a specific deal with one of your sponsors. Is that right?
Exactly. And that's who is attracted to our content, the people that have a tolerance for that level of depth. It's not for everyone. You know, our download numbers are not going to be impressive, but what can be created by those download numbers is extremely impressive.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, Hunter, what a true pleasure talking to you. Right. So we're going to wrap up with 3 sign-off questions that I ask all of my guests. It will be in a book at some point. I'll put it all together and a video and all kinds of stuff. So 3 quick sign-off questions. Then I want to introduce you to one of my clients. So we'll do that offline. All right, as a guest, perhaps. So first question. For a sponsor starting out syndicating their real estate projects online, just starting, what's the most important thing they should keep in mind?
As real estate investors, it's important to look at things on a risk-adjusted basis. And so anytime I could make a $300 investment in a microphone, for example, that could potentially unlock an amazing amount of equity, I'm going to make that investment. As long as you remove that emotional component that we talked about earlier, you can see things through a clear lens. Looking at business initiatives through that lens and what could potentially be created if you do put yourself out there in a meaningful way, as opposed to what you may lose, is just very, very powerful.
Second question. What's been the hardest lesson you've learned online?
Let me think for a second, because I want to answer this honestly. hardest? I had most of my business failures prior to the online space. So online, I will say that I hesitated to make a really significant investment in having a back-end investor-facing portal for quite some time. Once I made that investment, everything made so much more sense. Just to clarify, we have a portal that interfaces with our investors. It's like having an amazing assistant that never makes a mistake and works 24/7. So it's expensive, and I hesitated, but that was probably a big learning point. Again, looking at things on a risk-adjusted basis, if someone gets an improper distribution, it could be quite a headache. That portal and that technology ensures that doesn't happen.
Fascinating. Okay, very interesting. Last question. What are your key daily habits that make you successful online?
Going from a broad perspective, I have developed over a couple of years just a morning routine that's really helped me. Not really focusing on the online component, but really, if you are an ultra high performer, I know many of your listeners and guests are, taking 10 minutes to go through and listen to one of those app meditation things, again, on a risk-adjusted basis, what you could gain from taking that 10 minutes to meditate versus what you could lose from taking that 10 minutes to meditate is just really, really profound. So yeah, that's my honest answer.
Hunter Thompson, ASYM Capital.
That's right.
An enormous pleasure. Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure having you on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks again.
Right, that was Hunter Thompson, managing principal of ASYM Capital, and a fascinating discussion about why you should also have your own podcast, which, by the way, if you're interested in starting your own podcast, is by remarkable coincidence part of the services that we offer here at Gower Crowd to our clients. And if you'd like to see exactly how to build the most robust digital marketing system on the web for attracting investors to your deals, be sure to sign up for the free whiteboard workshop where I walk you through the entire system for how to raise money for your deals online so you can do it yourself. You can access that at the podcast page for today's episode at gowercrowd.com. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for listening, and thank you, Hunter Thompson of ASYM Capital, for your time today and for telling us all about the value of podcasting. That's all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.